Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Leanna Ramos, and I am the Marketing Associate here at JMIR Publications. I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar. Today's session topic is Research Integrity in Scientific Publishing, Developments, Challenges, and Solutions. We will begin in just a moment, but before we do, I just want to call out a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, all microphones will be muted during this webinar. However, we do encourage you to engage with our panelists by submitting your questions. You can do this easily by typing your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and there will be a designated time towards the end for our panelists to address them. Additionally, we want to let you know that this event is being recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Also, we value your input on today's session. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will share a brief feedback survey in the chat. Taking a few minutes to complete it will be essential in helping us shape and improve our future webinars. So that's all from my end. I'd like to introduce Elliott Lumb and Matt Swift. Elliott Lumb is a co-founder of Signals. He was previously the founder of PeerRef, a journal independent peer review platform. He has consulted for publishers and held several roles at Frontiers, including in the strategy and planning team. In 2018, Elliott completed a PhD in medicinal chemistry at Monash University and the University of Nottingham. Matt Swift is the Research Integrity Manager at JMIR Publications, responsible for management of publication ethics and integrity cases across the entire publisher portfolio. This includes cases related to peer review integrity, authorship disputes, data integrity, and adherence to ethical standards. Prior to working at JMIR Publications, Matt worked in journal development at Canadian Science Publishing and as an associate editor in the publication ethics team at PLOS. This followed a postdoctoral career at the University of Nottingham. So with that, I'll pass things over to Matt to get us started with today's session.
Yeah, thanks, Leanna. I'll just share my screen and hopefully everyone can see this. And yeah, we'll get started. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Leanna. As was said, we'll be looking at research integrity today and the challenges that we face. And I just wanted to introduce the sort of key takeaways that we'll be bringing here today first. So to start off with, we'll be looking at what a research integrity team actually does. So, I think to kind of outside observers, sometimes the work that we do can sometimes be a little opaque and a little kind of mysterious. And I kind of hopefully aim to make it a bit more transparent. And transparency is a word you'll be hearing me say a lot today. We'll also be looking at the functions of editorial notices. So instances where, we've got an article, we've identified maybe a problem or an error, and we need to update that article to, maintain the scientific record. The biggest challenges facing research integrity teams will be a big topic of discussion here. So, things like generative AI, the threat of paper mills, like the pressures that are on researchers in the contemporary environment. And then also the final takeaway will be about, well, what can we actually do about these problems? And that is where, Elliott will come in and introduce some of the things he's been working on at Signals and the sort of more kind of systematic approaches that publishers are now taking to kind of handle and deal with these threats. So I think to anyone who's taken a kind of like passing interest in research integrity, these headlines will probably be very familiar. They become more and more common over the kind of like the last 15 years. Not to say that research integrity issues didn't exist kind of before. They of course did, but recently in the kind of like last 2 decades, we've begun to see a kind of more systematic and industrialized impact of kind of research integrity issues. So obviously we now have things like paper mills, which we'll discuss later on. We have kind of like batch retractions. We have, the onset of AI and citation errors, such as Larry the Cat, and all of these kind of issues are becoming more and more prominent as we move forward. And there's a growing expectation on publishers to kind of deal with these problems, at the front end, and to really kind of make sure that the research environment retains as much integrity as possible. And in response to these threats that publishers and the community are responding, many publishers like JMIR have a designated research integrity team and staff, and these people are, solely responsible for evaluating issues with manuscripts, whether that be pre-publication or post-publication reviews, and having these staff on hand with expertise in guidelines and policies really helps make things easier for editors when making decisions on whether to take editorial action on a paper. There exists a small but extremely significant community of online sleuths who in the past sort of 15 years have examined published articles online for concerns. Now, these individuals have really helped drive a lot of these changes, and it's great to have such an active community. Obviously, the key responsibility lies with publishers on preventing these issues, but we remain extremely thankful to the people who point out issues with articles that we have and really help us maintain that scientific record. And then also, like, as the final point, publishers, as I mentioned before, are increasingly beginning to harness technology-based solutions as kind of preventative tools for these issues. And that's where, people like Elliott and Signals come in, and we'll have a really good look at what they can offer to publishers to kind of, deal with these issues. Because given the volume that publishers now engage with in terms of submissions and accepts and all these kind of things, it is impossible for, this to be done manually effectively. So harnessing these kind of technology-based solutions is really essential for publishers to kind of safeguard their environment. So to kick off, like, the role of the research integrity team and what I do, I've kind of simplified this as much as possible into two kind of main points as to what we do. So the first is that we ensure articles comply with policies and code guidance. So all journals will have policies on authorship, conflicts of interest, ethical approval, and data integrity. And these should be viewable and accessible to all authors prior to submission. I would strongly advise, if you're considering submitting to a journal, that you read these policies in full. They are serious, they will be enforced, and they do form the basis for a submission. And it is my job and the job of the team to ensure that these policies are followed through, and to address issues if we find a policy breach on any of those certain topics. In turn, journal policies are guided by an organization called the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE. So COPE is a non-profit organization. It serves as essentially the gold standard for publishers in sort of designing and really kind of tailoring their policies to meet the requirements of the modern publishing environment. Most policies will usually be derived from a form of COPE guidance. We usually, publishers can consult with COPE about certain cases or about certain policies, and really it's a kind of back and forth relationship to ensure that journals and publishers are meeting the best standards as laid down by the Committee on Publication Ethics. And then the second part of the team's job is to, as I mentioned before, to update the scientific record. So that involves carrying out post-publication investigations, which may result in certain types of editorial action, working with authors and their respective institutes to resolve issues or cases when they come up. And then the key one here in regards to updating the scientific record is publishing editorial notices when necessary to transparently update the scientific record. And again, I would highlight transparency there. It is essential that whenever we do apply an editorial notice to an article, it's viewable, it's accessible, people can see the reasons as to why this decision was taken. And that really makes sure that, when people are interpreting or, engaging with the literature, they're really doing it and they have a full view of what's going on. Nothing is hidden. Everything is out in the open and transparent. So just a little bit more on COPE, mentioned before. So JMIR, our flagship journal, is a member of COPE, and it operates, it's a kind of collaboration of editors. They have a committee and a chair. They host regular forums where publishers go and discuss issues, and really kind of it's a great forum for the development of policy ideas, and really kind of like the front line to identify where potential things need addressing with regard to change. And being a member of COPE gives us that ability to kind of engage with other publishers, engage and really have that exchange of ideas. And usually, as I mentioned before, any kind of editorial action is governed by COPE guidelines, which were recently updated, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail later on. So, we have an investigation, let's say, we have a case, we have an issue that's raised by a reader. what, as an integrity team, are we looking to do? What are the key things that we're trying to get out of our investigation? It can be narrowed down to more or less four things. Again, being transparent. We want to, raise concerns that are given to us by readers to the authors. We want to engage with them to allow them to have the opportunity to reply. That is an essential part of this process. A publisher or a journal should never really be taking action on any form of article without engaging with the authors first about the concern. Even if the concern looks extremely serious, the authors have a right to reply, and they have a right to be given a timeline to reply that is both reasonable and fair. And at that point, if we get information back, then we can begin to operate on the concern. If they don't respond, then we will have to act on the evidence that's available to us. But that second point there is incredibly important. And I think it's important for people who raise issues to understand that when we engage with authors, that these are people usually engaged in research, they're very busy. We need to give them adequate timelines to respond in full to what can be extremely complex issues. The third is that we want to engage with readers. So, if someone sends in a concern, we will answer the request. We can't guarantee that we'll give them a step-by-step update on the case, but we engage with them. We inform them as to what has happened with the investigation, if any editorial action has been published, and really, the forward-facing, the front-facing editorial notices really also engage with the readers on that level as well, because they give the results of any investigation and what we found. And again, number 4, protect and maintain the scientific record. We want to update it and keep it as up to date as possible, making sure that if anything is found to be unreliable, then we really, hammer home and really help update that. So I wanted to just give a sort of brief sort of timeline of an investigation, because I think this is quite a good illustrative example of sometimes why cases can take quite a while. You can see an issue in a paper, for example, you raise it to the journal, it looks extremely open and shut from the exterior, but there's actually a lot happening under the surface, which can sometimes lead to some of these, delays in a response for what may appear on the surface to be a simple issue. So we first get the concern. These can be identified obviously by our staff, our editorial team. They can be identified by the readers. These concerns can be raised to us anonymously or by a specific person who's named. We treat the concern as the concern. We are not necessarily influenced or bothered by who is raising the concern, provided, and this is the second point, the concern raised is valid. So when we get an issue that comes from a reader or a staff member, before we go to the authors, we need to verify that it is a legitimate concern. This prevents us from, raising an issue to authors which could be answered very quickly or simply, or that we haven't, checked to make sure it is a thing ourselves. But it also means that, we're going to the authors with, a solution or a path forward to resolution, and ask them for what they want. Ask them for specific requirements to, give us the evidence that we need to address the concern in full. And only at that point would we go forward to the authors for comment. So again, the authors are given a kind of timeline and a deadline to respond. This is, made in allowance and consideration of their schedule. It isn't going to be a day or 2 days. It's normally a couple of weeks, and that is again listed in code guidance. It gives them the chance to sort of, gather any relevant data or supplementary material, because we may be asking them about an article that was published several years ago. It may not be, at the forefront of their thoughts. And giving them that time is really essential. At the end of that timeline, hopefully they provide us with a response, and any accompanying kind of documentation or any information that we have asked for to help resolve the case. And then comes the kind of bit where we evaluate that response. Now, this can be very, very quick, or it can be very, very long. It purely depends on the type of issue that we face. If we're looking at a single piece of data that was erroneously duplicated, and we get sent a kind of underlying database file that we can validate very quickly, we can do that extremely quickly and get, and correct that as necessary. If it applies to multiple articles, or if it applies to multiple concerns within the same article, or the response given doesn't fully kind of match up to what we've asked for, then this takes a little bit more time. So that those sort of middle 3 points there can often kind of repeat and go back and forth depending on the kind of response that's given by the authors. But hopefully, what we get once we've evaluated that concern in full is we reach an outcome. And when we deliver that outcome to the authors, we deliver it with transparency and we deliver it with a clear explanation as to why we have reached that. So, if we are retracting an article, we give very specific reason with clear references to the policy that applies and an explanation that this concern has not been resolved. If we are correcting, the correction, can sometimes be driven by the authors. Sometimes it's on the at the behest of the editorial team. Again, we would give the reasons and what is required. And then once we've delivered that outcome, we normally have a turnaround time to produce the editorial notice, and then that would be applied to the manuscript and to the article, and subsequently relayed to relevant indexing areas, so PubMed database and all that kind of thing. And this ensures that any kind of editorial notice is viewable, searchable, citable, and accessible to all readers. So outcomes and editorial notices, this generally covers the kind of whole spectrum of what you're likely to see. So it may be at the end of the investigation, the authors can provide a suitable explanation as to why a certain thing is the way it is. And in which case, if we're happy with that, then we don't take action. We would reply to the reader with an explanation as to why. But there would be no kind of mark on the case to indicate that, this happened, we're happy, the findings aren't invalidated, they're considered reliable, and the author's fully engaged. Rejection is a pre-publication editorial decision, of course. So at pre-publication, obviously, we're screening for concerns. If we notice any kind of manipulation or any kind of severe error where the authors have breached a policy before publication has been reached, then we will reject. Even though the rejection is not viewable, we are transparent again with the authors about why their article is being rejected. And that's, again, really important. We would never just send a simple rejection email and leave it at that. They would get a clear explanation. Then we move into post-publication editorial notices. So an editorial note is a kind of update, I guess, is the best way to kind of describe it on a paper. This is where a paper may have, a thing that is considered odd or a bit strange about it, but upon investigation, it's determined that this isn't actually an error. And usually the editorial notes are kind of just there to inform readers that, for example, an issue was looked at, but the editorial office doesn't really consider that there was a concern to answer, but it provides clarity to readers about whatever that issue may be. Then we move to a corrigendum or a correction, and there are specific instances in which corrections are used, which I'll go over. But this is a formal correction of an error in a published article, and again formally updates the scientific record. And when that correction goes in place, the updated version is the version of record. Then that is the version that needs to be cited. It needs to be updated, and again, relevant indexing databases are informed of this. Then we move on to an expression of concern. An expression of concern is a kind of middle ground between a kind of interim notice very often. And this is where, concerns are raised that can't be resolved in full by the authors, or, some findings of the paper may be unreliable, or there's a kind of unresolvable policy breach. And I'll go over what one of those may be in the next few slides. And then, of course, the final kind of, I guess, most the editorial action that kind of has the most sort of ramifications and kind of conversations attached to it is a formal retraction. So a retraction is when authors can't resolve an issue, the issue affects the reliability of the findings, and the article is formally removed from the scientific record. And again, I'll go over some sort of features of a retraction over the next few slides. So with a correction, the sort of features or instances that we would do this is when we have a concern in the article's conclusions or results, and the authors can provide evidence that this was a mistake or an error, or have underlying data that kind of resolves that concern. So this would, if it's a data replication, for example, the replication of values because of a copy and pasting or a scripting error, if they can provide us with that kind of underlying data file, and we can see that, oh, I can see how this happened. There's a clear, thread of logic between how something may have occurred, or it doesn't impact the remainder of the article, then generally we use a correction. Usually, the remaining findings of the paper are obviously unaffected by this error. That is to say that there's no other issues with the article itself that we would be, concerned about. Other examples may be an updating to kind of the metadata, so corrections to an author's name or a conflict of interest statement. So, the authors possibly who may be affiliated with a private company, maybe they've listed their affiliation down in the author metadata, but have forgot to say that they are, employees of a particular company. Then we would consider a correction to update that COI statement. And again, there are no other additional research integrity related concerns. We have no concerns about the peer review process, the underlying data, the results, article metadata, and all these kind of things. So those kind of 4 features or instances are when we would apply a correction. We move on to an expression of concern. So as mentioned before, the issue can't be resolved in full by the authors. And this could be due to a lack of data availability. It could be due to the fact that the data that they send us doesn't quite tally up to what we were expecting or really uphold the findings of the article. It's also used in certain instances of unresolvable policy breach. Now that could be journals usually have like a data availability policy, so you will see instances of an expression of concern where the data is no longer available, but the journal policy mandated, for example, that this data needed to remain available or to be deposited in a kind of online repository. And in those cases, we would apply an EOC and inform readers that this data is no longer available. Again, the findings are considered may be considered unreliable due to the error that can't be resolved. So it's a word of caution to readers that they should interpret these results with a sort of degree of skepticism. And then the fourth one is that an EOC was traditionally used as a kind of interim notice during kind of a long-term investigation, where a final resolution wasn't going to be quickly forthcoming. So this could be an internal investigation by an authors institute. It could be an issue where the authors are looking for data, but it may take some time. We would normally apply this notice to inform readers that there is an investigation in progress. With the update to the kind of code guidance in the last couple of months, EOCs can now be used as a kind of final resolution too, which does give us more flexibility to kind of deal with those policy breaches, as I mentioned there. And then finally, with regards to retraction, the authors can't resolve the issue, and the error, compromises the finding of the article, or we've identified a major integrity issue such as peer review manipulation or a paper mill kind of feature, which we'll discuss later. But generally, the article is found to have breached our standards, and at that point, we would consider retraction. And we would also consider retraction as a result of institutional investigation. These normally can take a bit of time, but we would apply a retraction, for example, if an institute has found evidence of misconduct in their investigation. So I think one thing I just want to clear up is what actually happens to a retracted article. So contrary to like some beliefs that I've heard, a retracted article does not disappear usually. It should, as per code guidance, remain online and viewable, albeit clearly noted as retracted. This is an example of a retraction notice here, and you can see this has a link to the article that's being retracted. This is called bidirectionality, so the article itself will have a link back to the retraction notice. The retraction notice has its own DOI, so it can be cited, and it's part of the published scientific record as well. And normally in a retraction notice, we'll have like a statement as to why the article is being retracted, and a kind of position statement on whether the authors agreed or disagreed with the retraction. In this particular instance here, this was an article where the authors had concerns about an external company, so they actually requested it, so the authors agreed. We identified that there was an issue, and we kind of agreed that these findings are potentially really unreliable. It would be most responsible to retract. To the article itself, you get a notice above it indicating that it's not to be cited and the article has been retracted. And again, that kind of bi-directional link back to the actual retraction notice. Excuse me. Yeah, and full removal of an article's content in a retraction only occurs in like very rare circumstances. So if there is kind of an immediate threat to someone, maybe someone's information is out there in a retracted article, or there is copyright infringement in the retracted article, then a removal may be considered. But for all other concerns that can't be resolved resulting in retraction, the article will remain online and viewable, albeit clearly, delineated and cited with the retraction notice. So that's kind of like a very, a quick run through of like what we do and what the outcomes we get. But these kind of things exist because we are faced by really kind of unprecedented challenges in the publishing environment. In before the onset of AI and before the onset of really kind of like the modern internet, publishing was an extremely different environment. Research integrity issues still existed, but we didn't have that kind of systematic impact that we kind of have these days. So one of the kind of main pressures and challenges that is placed on publishers is also like the pressures that are placed on researchers. So there is such pressure on researchers these days to to publish, to get their names out there, to really, as the saying goes, publish or perish. The pressure to get articles out to be considered for grants and career advancement is a huge pressure on people, and unfortunately in some cases this can push people to behavior that isn't considered ethical, or to seek out certain things that really contravene research integrity. And obviously these pressures are not placed on the publisher directly, but we do get those pressures put on us because they also apply to authors. So very often you may see stories about retracted articles where someone was attempting to do something to get a certain grant or promotion or things like that, and that is a challenge that we have to face, and it's a challenge that I think science in general has to face moving forward. And really, even though those pressures exist, really trying to educate people as to like why it's important to maintain integrity even despite these things. Back to these headlines again, and I've mentioned it several times already. You'll see the use of the word paper mills. So paper mills have become a huge, huge issue in modern publishing. But I think people hear the word sometimes and are not always sure like what it means. Like what is a paper mill? So generally they are usually organized or organizations that will put out fraudulent or poor quality research en masse. So it will go to publishers. The features of the articles will be very similar. They'll have certain, tells, as it were, that to indicate that they've maybe come from the same place or that the data isn't reliable. But because of the volume, it can be difficult to detect these early on. And Elliott's work will, as he'll go into, will kind of identify that modern tools and analysis tools can maybe identify when a journal has now been targeted by a paper mill. They get a sudden rise in certain types of submissions that they haven't encountered before, maybe indicative of a paper mill. And normally these are engaged in like highly unethical practices such as authorship for sale, or publishing on people's behalf and being paid a fee to do so, all these kind of things. So it is extremely it's a big challenge. They are becoming more and more sophisticated as time goes on, and they are definitely towards the top challenges that we face in research integrity. Another big challenge that we face is the development and advent of generative AI. It's I guess can be considered a blessing and a curse in many ways. There's many models out there. They're constantly learning. They're constantly adapting. Are being developed by extremely large tech companies. There's huge amounts of resources being poured into these things, and they're becoming really sophisticated, and that raises problems for us as publishers. You can type a question into ChatGPT or ask it to generate something for you, and it will do it. And validating that information is really the key thing, and it's difficult and becoming increasingly difficult to have that validation. And it's not just with information itself. We're seeing with generative AI the ability to kind of like replicate microscopy images such as you see here. And these days a lot of them are kind of really very difficult to discern which is which. And because of that, the pressure on us to really identify these issues and deal with them is really increasing, and we have to kind of adapt and think on our feet constantly because this thing is constantly changing. And you'll see on the right there, that's an article of a fake article on fake articles created by ChatGPT by Elliott. And you can see that if you just read some of the first bit, it comes across as extremely, genuine and seemingly well-written research. It's difficult for us to pick up on these things as these things get more and more sophisticated. So as I said, they're kind of like constantly evolving. They're not easily detectable. And I think one of the most kind of alarming features that exist because of generative AI is the propagation of errors. Now, that's bad science or fake science that goes out and is then cited, or science that isn't genuine, or is a generated image, as we saw before. But also, like, you can come across instances where a reference is a fake reference and it will appear several times because it's just immediately considered valid because it's a published article. And identifying that and stopping that error propagation at source is extremely difficult, and it really leaves us in a kind of space where we need to really think hard about how we deal with these issues. And of course, the other issue, the main one, and one we think about a lot, is that these generative AI models can be used legitimately. JMIR has policies on generative AI. We request that it is fully disclosed as to when it's used and how. And again, that policy really helps us make decisions on where we need to draw the line on how this thing is used. But I think what's important is that these lines will become increasingly blurred as time goes on. And, we as these get more sophisticated, the detectability becomes more of an issue. And that's where hopefully, as Elliott will show, we can, begin to maybe identify patterns or trends and really sort of indicate where this kind of undisclosed use of Gen AI is occurring. So I'm just going to stop mine. That concludes my part of the talk. So I'm just going to briefly stop sharing, and I'm going to hand over to Elliott, and I'll be back towards the end, and we'll have a Q&A after that. So I'll just hand over to Elliott now.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, share my screen. Okay, you can see this. Can I get a nod, Matt?
Yes.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, so Matt gave like a really good overview of kind of what the research integrity team does. Hopefully I can show you like how we help them out with some of these challenges that he also presented. And also how we can help researchers to deal with these issues as well. So Matt went over the challenges, just to frame a little bit about how we're thinking about this problem as well. Um, there's this huge amount of literature. It's growing like really quickly. I think it's growing quicker this year, most likely because AI making it easier to write papers. Um, and you might find, when you're looking for research, it's difficult to find the thing you want to read. Um, and the quality is ranging really from groundbreaking stuff that you need to read to just noise, the stuff that just never gets read, never gets cited, and then outright fraud, like things like, for example, by paper mills. So this is really creating a trust problem within the research ecosystem. It's affecting publishers, so they're not certain of what to trust when they get a submission. And we can see from our analysis that the number of problematic articles that they're publishing is increasing. Now, this is causing problems for researchers. You might find that you don't know what to trust when you're looking through the literature. Um, we've asked researchers, and over two-thirds of them, have skipped articles just because they don't know, can I trust it? We're concerned about AI models getting trained with this research. So Kaveh has already asked in the Q&A, hi Kaveh, about retracted articles getting used by AI. That is a problem, and I think we need to address that. But there are also articles that are not yet retracted that are problematic, and we need those to not go into AI models as well. And then society is also losing trust in research and experts. And we can see this, for example, in reduction um, in vaccinations. So we do have ways of assessing research, but they're not going to solve the trust problem. Um, so examples of this are like journal brands and researcher reputation. These aren't really reliable proxies of trust because research has become globalized. And in many ways, this is a really good thing. There's more research and more people are engaging in research, but we don't know everyone anymore. We don't know who is trustworthy. And that's a bigger problem when we know there's a rising amount of fraud. We have citation-based metrics, things like the impact factor. These are lagging indicators. They're like nuance and precision. They don't really tell us much about an individual article. And then there's attention-based metrics, things like how much has it been, how many retweets on Twitter. This certainly isn't an indicator of trust or quality. And so what we're doing at Signals is providing comprehensive, dynamic, and as Matt said, transparent evaluations of research. And so providing a number of things. We give an overall evaluation of an article. This might say an alert, which means, hey, we think you should look at it, investigate it further. It could say caution or looks good. And then we give reasons why we've given that evaluation. And we'll do that as individual signals. Now, these could be from checks on a manuscript that are automated. It could be because of the author's previous works, the institutions that they're from. It could be from insights from real researchers. So a researcher may have noted on an article that it has an image problem, for example. Or we can do analysis of the citation network around the article. So, for example, if an article is completely built on retracted or problematic research, we probably know that that article is also problematic. And we have an AI-powered research integrity assistant that can help investigate articles too. So we build these evaluations with our evaluation engine. And this has three pillars. So one is networked research data. Now, there's tons of research data out there. So we can evaluate hundreds of millions of publications, get data on those. We get manuscripts from publishers that we work with, and that gives us access to information on hundreds of millions of authors, their institutions, and we can connect this data together through the citation network, and we can pull insights out of those connections. We overlay that with expert knowledge. So this is insights from real researchers who found issues in articles. We get insights from research integrity teams like Matt, who we work closely with. And through doing this work, we build a lot of insight as well. And then that's layered with AI. So as I mentioned, we have AI spotted investigations. We do extraction and analysis with AI and are working on LLM evaluations. And we bring these together to create these quite deep evaluations of like every publication that's out there and any manuscript that is sent to us that is not yet published. And just to say, this is all possible because of a really powerful technology base. Everything's based around what we call the signals data graph. This is where all the data goes in, it's stored, it's connected. On top of that, we have analyzers that then we build products out of. And those products are used, for example, by publishers and research integrity teams. And so we help publishers with a number of challenges. And one thing we do is help them find issues in their portfolios. So at this point, most publishers have published something that's problematic, right? It's kind of inevitable at this point. And so they want to find out where these problems are and resolve them and retract them or go to the authors to figure out what the issues are. So we help, it's really, really hard to do this manually. So we help publishers kind of analyze their portfolios and figure out, okay, which journals have problems, when did they have problems, what type of problems. What you can see in this image is it's an entire portfolio that we analyzed, and each line is a different journal. And where there's more red, that's where there's more issues in an individual journal. And of course, we can dive deeper into each of those journals to figure out specific issues. But publishers don't just want to, clean up problems being created. They want to stop these from happening, right? So we help by having analysis and evaluations at the point of submission. So we help people like Matt to identify problems that would be really, really hard to spot, just like as a human looking at this. Or we do something that they do, but speed them up so they can focus on other tasks as well. So what we're doing, we integrate into their systems. You may have, if you're a researcher, have engaged with something like Scholar One or Editorial Manager when you submit an article. What happens is a manuscript goes in to these things, and then the information is sent to us at Signals. We return an evaluation. Again, someone like Matt will look at, and it will help them make the decision. Do they want to go back to the authors to ask about an issue? Is it a reject because there's a real severe problem? Or perhaps it's just sent to peer review, and we can actually speed up that decision as well. Then as we go through the workflow after peer review, for example, we can evaluate again. Have any issues been introduced? This is something that can happen. And then, of course, there post-publication. Again, we can find issues in research that is published too, so we can retract that as quickly as possible. But we don't just help publishers, we're supporting researchers as well. So Signals evaluations are integrated into research discovery workflows. This includes a product called Nancy. This is something by the NIH. It's a research discovery tool. So as a researcher, you can flick through this, find articles, and there'll be the Signals evaluation there. So it helps you filter out potentially problematic works or focusing on the high quality works. We have a similar thing with LitMaps, which is a research discovery tool, and will soon be live in Lean Library. You don't need to be using these platforms. You can come directly to Signals. Okay, so you can go to our website, which I've placed here. You can create a free account, and you can take a DOI of any article and search that in Signals, and we'll show you the evaluation. You can see the evaluation, you can see the signals for that, further information on each of those. And if you found something out about this article, maybe you found an issue with it, let's say it's got an image problem, or it's got some text that is really clearly written by, say, AI, you believe it's fraudulent, or maybe you think it's great, and it's got like great methods, you can tell us, and this will appear on, after review, will appear on Signals. As I mentioned, we have this, everything's built on the Signals data graph, and we can do something pretty interesting because it's a graph. So every article is connected in a number of ways. That could be through citations, it could be shared authorship because they share an institution. And because of those connections, it means that evaluations influence each other. So we might have an article and everything looks good. There's no issues at all in this network. Now, if you as a researcher find an issue, you find an image manipulation problem in an article, and you tell us that will change the evaluation on an individual article, but it will also impact the network around it. So authors' other works, things that cite that article. So it'll help you to identify issues in other parts of the literature so we can uncover them more easily. We do tend to find these problematic articles clustered together, but also if a legitimate article is referencing issues, that's something we need to know about as well. And just say another use case for researchers, you can search individual articles, you can get involved with evaluating them, but you can also create collections of articles. So how some researchers have used this is they're building, say, a systematic review, and so they collect all of their evidence base into here, and they can see all of the evaluations alongside those articles. And they can actually give them objective criteria to exclude articles and really make sure that we're building things like systematic reviews on just credible research, because that's super, super important. Okay, that's it from me. Please do head over to Signals, create a free account, search articles, send us contributions. If you have any feedback or would like to discuss Signals, yeah, please drop me an email. I'm happy to have a chat. Great. I'll hand back over to you, Matt.
Yep, thank you. Again, I'll just very quickly share my screen here. Yeah, so many thanks to Elliott there. And I'd just like to finish with just really documenting our partners. So you see Cope and the various people we're partnered with here. Not included on this list, but they now should be, is Signals themselves, of course. We released a press release a few weeks ago indicating that we're now directly collaborating together to improve and increase the reliability and integrity of our publications. You can follow us on various social media outlets. And just to say thank you. And I think we have around 15 minutes or so for the Q&A. So great. Yeah, thank you. Liana, I think I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your presentations. So we've had a number of questions come in while you were both talking and presenting. So firstly, I'll kick things off by saying I posted the link to the survey in the chat. So just to keep that handy, if you're interested in filling that out, responses are anonymous. And it should pop up after we close out the webinar, and we'll also resend that link in our post attendance email as well. So just to keep that on the top of everyone's mind. But yeah, we'll start off with the Q&A period here. So one of the questions we got was, how do you define the boundaries between the different outcomes when the lines are blurry? So for example, between an EOC, corrigendum, or retraction?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think it speaks to a lot of the kind of cases we get. They can be kind of, borderline or difficult to make a decision on. I think when we get those cases, what we do in all cases is that we discuss our findings and our suggestions with the editors in chief or our scientific editors. And if we are really struggling to make a decision as to whether something has been resolved or the potential impact it could have if we choose to either correct or do choose another solution or an EOC and a retraction, is that we can reach out to members of our kind of like editorial board who have certain expertise, who can really understand like if a particular error impacts a paper severely in a particular field. I am a neuroscientist by trade, therefore I understand neuroscience articles, but I can't possibly understand all of the articles we publish or specific things. So I am making a judgment from my perspective based on the article's adherence to our research integrity policies. And the kind of follow-up to that is that the scientific issues are addressed by people with expertise. In those kind of more blurry cases, we can ask multiple people to take a look. We'll discuss things more. We sometimes may, in certain circumstances, depending on the issue, may reach out to the institution and ask for kind of their input as to what's happened. What's important is that, again, as stated before, authors do get the chance to provide evidence and reply. And if they can answer these questions that are maybe put forward by the additional scrutiny we place on it when we get these cases, then we can maybe reach an understanding about a particular editorial notice or not. But it's a really good question, and I think the sort of takeaway is that we would never, even retractions are not punitive officially, as per the code guidance. They are not punitive. We are there to update the scientific record, so we are not attempting to catch people out or to trip people up. We want to engage in a scientific dialogue, and when we get those cases that are on the border or blurry, I think that is what we try to do the most. We kind of boil it down to like, does this impact the science? If yes, then we maybe move towards an EOC or retraction. If the issue is resolvable, no, we would err more towards a correction. But it's a really good question. And I think it's one of those that doesn't have a single definable answer, sadly.
Awesome. We've got a few more questions coming in here. Some people have asked this similar question about ChatGPT and the use of AI. So as an early career undergraduate student using ChatGPT ethically to support my writing and brainstorming, how can I disclose this transparently in a way that journals respect, but without being misunderstood as misusing AI?
Okay, cool. I'll take that, and then I think Elliott, if you have any thoughts on this, we can come back to that. But I think the key thing is, this is where I kind of, we mentioned that it can be used legitimately and for the development of ideas. There are certain guidelines, and these are actually on our kind of like, we have a policy on this as to like set an editorial actually on this, on steps to follow if you are using it. It kind of boils down to a couple of key things. Number one would be like to disclose that you've used this software to the journal on a submission. Please do it because it is absolutely essential. It means that, if we do spot an error and you have disclosed it, we can raise it in the context of that disclosure. To have an error in an article because of ChatGPT is not a reason for rejection. To have an error in because of ChatGPT because you haven't disclosed it is a more serious issue. And that's kind of where we would draw the line. The second point I would say on that is that, and this is a requirement, it's in our policies, is that if you're using it, you need to fact check. Please don't take what is raised at face value. It sounds simple. And everyone, I think everyone assumes that they would like to do this, but we see very often instances where people just haven't searched very easily verifiable information. And those are the kind of two main things I would say if you are using these tools that we expect. And I've said it, Elliott said it as well, just transparency, just be as transparent as possible and, help us. And in turn, if there are issues, we can help you. Elliott, I don't know if you have anything like from that on a more kind of signals side of it, or like if you come across these things like when compiling like your databases and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me to define publisher policy on this. We'll just say, I work with a lot of different publishers, and most, if not all, now have some kind of AI policy. One challenge that you might find is that they tend to differ quite a lot. So something that Matt said earlier is read the policy before submitting. So you don't want to get caught out, right, later. But in general, I think, sorry, my cat is getting involved. Is the everyone's going to be using AI in some capacity now, right? It's a useful tool. From all the questions I've seen on it, it seems there's a lot of questions about it. And so it's just where it's being used, make sure it's disclosed in some capacity. And yeah, as I say, check out the policy pages on a journal before submitting that.
Awesome, thank you. And I've just shared in the chat some of our links to articles for policies and best practices regarding AI tools. So you could take a look at those. Let's see. Sorry, questions are coming in fast and furious here. Let's see what we've got. How do you think universities and publishers can work better together, to maintain the integrity of the scientific record?
Again, I'll probably Elliott, do you want to
start?
Jump in? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna show. Let me see if I can find it. A quick slide maybe on this to kind of highlight one of the issues that happens. So one problem that we have is that when retracting an article, for example, this can take a very, very long time. Now, this is a huge problem because if we know there's a problem, it needs to be taken out of the scientific record, or you need to be alerted about it so researchers aren't reading and citing these. Now, problems flagged, so like a sleuth might see something, but then it can take literally years to get this retracted. And that's often because it's the publisher has to engage with like the authors and the institutions. And there are the workflows are not super well set up for this. And so there are huge delays between these things. And so just one of these ways in which we could improve kind of integrity between publishers and institutions is to create more streamlined workflows between them. Maybe there are dedicated people at each of these organizations that know to contact each other, and they have like a standard that they go through. Something of this nature, because that is one of the things that is kind of a blocker there and could be improved. Another thing is kind of just institutions kind of being more educated in a way on research integrity. Publishers, in my view, are probably the most knowledgeable at this stage on research integrity problems. And when I say that, I mean within, say, researchers, publishers, institutions, and funders. And publishers are most educated because they've had the problems, right? They've had to do lots of retractions. We've seen things like the Hindawi had to like shut down because they had so many issues. So it's a concern that's top of their minds. Now, institutions haven't seemed to experience a problem yet. And so, the research comes out of from the author, it goes to the publisher, and the institution's a little bit hands off. But in some ways, the institution is kind of like the employer of the researcher. So it may be that they maybe should be more involved. And certainly, like sleuths and integrity professionals that I speak to, definitely think in the near future, institutions will be a bit more involved in these processes.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that, and I think the only point I wanted to like raise and follow on from Elliott is just that I was in university and through to the end of my PhD for 12, nearly just over 10 years, and I probably in that time had like a seminar or like educational lecture on research integrity probably once in my entire tenure. And I think it's because, like there's so much pressure on, postdocs and early career researchers to just simply produce research. Sometimes there isn't maybe that time set aside to like maybe stop and think about, well, what does it actually mean to publish a paper? Like, what are we doing with all this data we've collected? And I think if universities can and institutions can step in and really help on that front, and as publishers, I think it's incumbent on us to help institutions do that as well. So it works, all ways. I think we can help them in that respect as well. But yeah, I fully agree with what Elliott said there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So we have some questions that came in regarding the presentations themselves. So just as a reminder to everyone, the webinar is being recorded and will be sent out shortly afterwards. And a few people have asked for Elliott's email as well. So I've been sharing that in the chat too. I'm not sure if we want to put that up on the screen again for folks, or I can type it in the chat here. But yeah, we're coming up on the hour now. So just want to say thank you so much for your wonderful presentations today. They were very informative and helpful for everyone. And yeah, just a reminder to please fill out the survey. That helps us to improve the sessions going forward and offer new and engaging and informative content for everyone. So again, thanks so much for your time today, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.